All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to part two of evolution. We're looking at the pathways of evolution. Before we talked about the agents, so what actually causes evolution to occur. Now we're looking at the pathways. So after evolution occurs, which direction can it take? Here are some of the main ideas that we're going to be looking at. We group these two together. These are the different pathways, and this is pretty much the different speeds that those pathways can occur, and this is what actually causes an organism to change from one species to the next. So let's look at what speciation is first. So first of all, it just means this: the origin of a new species as a result of evolution. And what causes this evolution to occur is because of something called a niche. Each species occupies what we call a unique niche. So it eats something different, it lives somewhere, it behaves somewhere or a certain way in the environment. So let's look at an example between two different niches. So one niche used to be a normal inchworm, which is herbivorous, which means it eats plants. Well, there's been a change in evolution where this one organism eats beetles and other things that can fly by, so it's carnivorous. So that's a big difference in terms of its food and behavior. So it occupies a different niche. It actually is a different species. Okay. Next one. And the whole reason why these niches are so important is that it has to do with competition. When organisms compete, something's got to change. The less efficient one is going to be extinct or it's going to die out. And then what also might happen is if it's less efficient, it might just end up migrating to a new niche in order to be able to perform better there. Okay, so that's speciation, pretty much just creating a new species based on natural selection and all the other evolutionary agents. All right, let's look at the different pathways that can occur. The first one is divergent evolution. So this is where you have one species, and what happens is through evolutionary change, it changes into another species. So species 2 and species 1. Okay, so it branches off. These two, even though they have a common ancestor, are now kind of different species. So this occurs when? So if an organism becomes reproductively isolated, either because of physical or behavior barriers, this is when two different species or gene pools can occur. Spelling species. So let's look at an example here. When the Great Wall of China was created, it separated, whatever, that's fine. It separated two different species. So here's species 1, and this was also the same species, 1. Over time and breeding, certain mutations occurred, and now this gene tended to drift off, and so it changed into a whole different species. Okay, this one might have been the same, or it might have drifted off as well. It's because of this physical barrier that created these different species. Okay, the other thing is that gene pools become progressively more different in those environments because of these selective pressures. Okay, so pressure just means, if food is rare, if resources like sunlight is rare, if you're getting blocked out as a plant away from the sunlight, here you are, you're going to have to do one of two things. You're either going to grow to compete for that sunlight, or you're going to die. Okay. All right. Reproductive isolation. All it means is that you're not able to reproduce with certain organisms in another area. And so what happens if you can't reproduce with an organism in a certain area, you're going to end up becoming your own species. Okay, so divergent evolution, we just talked about what it is. Now we can talk about some evidence for it. Here's some evidence. Things that are homologous, so homo, the prefix means the same, and homologous structures just mean the same structures, which means they come from the common ancestors. So if you look at these, all of these organisms came from similar ancestors. They don't have the same function, so different function. Right? Obviously a bird, they use this for flying. Monkeys use it for grabbing. These ones use it for for movement in the water, pigs for movement. So there's, I guess, similar functions, but they are indifferent. And the other way, the other evidence is embryonic development. So an embryo, so when a first sperm and egg comes together and it starts developing, look at these embryos. All of these ones look pretty similar, but as we know, when a human develops and a fish develops, they look quite a bit different. So this is just some evidence to show that at one point we were all the same, but now we have all developed into our own type of species with different structures. Okay, diverging, going away, diverge. Convergent is the opposite. Convergent just means coming together. So this is saying that you're going to have similar traits, but it's come from unrelated lineages. So for example, usually it's due to living in a similar environment. We call these analogous structures, which means different. So they have different species but the same function. So let's look at some examples. So you might want to pause to write that down. So here's an example. We have bat wings, bird wings, insect wings. They're all very different in terms of their structure and their makeup, but they look quite similar and they have quite a similar function, obviously, for flying, but they did not come from the same lineage. Another one to think about is a bat, which is a mammal, and then we also have a type of bird. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head right now, but they both use echolocation, which means they're both able to bounce sound waves off of walls in order to see where they're going in caves. They don't develop it from the same lineage because mammals and birds are quite different, but they got them from living in the same environment. Okay, speed of evolution. Two quick things. Gradualism is one way to do it, where this is like the slow and steady, where it's just after one long instance, one species breaks off. This one keeps going, and then another species breaks off, and then something breaks off on that species. So it's very slow due to mutations over time, and this was proposed by Charles Darwin, the father of evolution. So let's compare that with punctuated equilibrium. So here's another diagram, so you can see that it just gradually changes the species, whereas something like punctuated equilibrium, which we're going to see in a second, there are major changes. So it goes from here, boom, changes to something else, boom, changes to something else, whereas this one keeps going the same. So let's talk, I would draw some sort of symbolic representation of that picture. Pause it now. And punctuated equilibrium is that last one that we're talking about. So this is where you just have normal, long, stable periods of uninterrupted change, and then all of a sudden, at one point, there's a big change. What causes these change? One, mass extinction. So like the extinctions, the three that we've had so far, one of them is at the end of the dinosaurs, where 99% of our species on Earth was wiped out. It's going to have a big impact on the type of species. Also, isolations of small populations. And then finally, something called adaptive radiation. Galapagos Islands. Pause it, write it down so I can show you this example. So what we have is we started with one type of species, but as these organisms moved to certain areas close by, different islands in the Galapagos, there's the food was a little bit different. So as you can see, their beaks over time, not much time, changed depending on what the food source was in that area. And if they weren't able to change, they ended up dying out. So it was quick change based on selective pressures in terms of where they were. Okay, so so this is what we're looking at. Make sure you know speciation, what causes different species to occur. Make sure you know the two types of ways that evolution can take it, and then also the speed of it. Okay, have a wonderful night.